Chapter 61. The future can arrive unexpectedly. Dr. Jenna rubbed his eyes, thinking he'd been reading too long, and scrolled back up to the report. Test result: uninfected. His breath stopped. He stared at the donor information again. Lewis. The blonde child with the strange mark who had turned beet red after drinking the wrong thing. For a moment, Dr. Jenna had to force himself not to react. He read through the files from the beginning to make sure he hadn't missed anything. Only this one was marked uninfected. He snapped the folder shut, went to the freezer, pulled the blood sample, and ran to the high-security lab. Out in the shelter, after fighting walkers, dealing with spies at the gas station, and fretting about the future, people were finally enjoying a rare lull. Louis took a quick shower to wash off dust and grime, then headed to the rec room. The shelf held little more than a CDC emergency handbook, an introduction to virology, and a few outdated magazines, exactly what he'd expected. He wasn't pleased, but it wasn't a surprise. When he guessed everyone had turned in for the night, Louis slipped back to his room and instead of sleeping, took the standard book of spells, grade 1, from his pack and began to memorize. The book was one of his few true possessions. He could use shrinking or muffliato to hide it, but the safest thing, if he lost his pack or it was stolen, was to commit everything to memory. He longed to learn the powerful spells, but he still couldn't cast even the simplest reparo reliably. In an apocalypse, you couldn't count on contingencies. If the book vanished, then without the knowledge in his head, he might as well be an extinct wizard. So he focused on practical basics first, learning the first-year syllabus and a few other essentials by heart. Just as he was running through the reparo casting steps again, there was a hurried knock. He stowed the book and opened the door. Dr. Jenna stood on the threshold, chest heaving, as if he'd run all the way. "Child," he said, voice ragged, "I need to tell you something. It's important. Can we talk?" Louis' suspicion was confirmed. "Something important?" he said, masking his nerves. "Okay." A few minutes later, Dr. Jenna led him into a disinfectant-scented lab and paused at the control panel. He kept his distance, studying Louis with a complicated, unreadable look. Finally, the doctor sighed and spoke in a tone colder and more serious than Louis had ever heard from him. "Child, what I'm about to say is very important. It concerns your safety." He hesitated, weighing his words. "I don't know if it's right to tell a child like you this, but I don't see a better option." When Dr. Jenna first saw the uninfected flag, he had planned to inform the child's supposed father, Rick, the lead officer. But the initial shock gave way to doubt as he replayed the group's interactions in his head. The child's hair was bright blonde. Rick and Lori both had dark brown hair. He had never heard Louis call Rick Dad or Father. The family dynamics were stranger than they'd appeared, and Dr. Jenna couldn't predict how Rick would react to such a revelation. Protective? Controlling? Something worse? He couldn't take that risk, not if this child might hold humanity's last hope. So he came to Louis directly. Listening to the doctor's gravity, Louis calmed. "You're here about the virus, aren't you?" he asked. Dr. Jenna looked up, surprised. "You know?" Louis nodded. "We all had blood tests. The results should be out by now." He added, watching the man's face, "You asked to see me alone and said it was about my safety. I figure it's the virus." "That's right." Dr. Jenna stepped forward as if relieved. "I have to tell you." They spoke at once and then stopped, stunned by each other's reaction. Louis blurted, "I'm infected with the virus, aren't I? How long do I have?" Dr. Jenna shouted back, "You don't have the virus." Silence hung between them. Louis looked as if he'd misunderstood. You don't know?" Dr. Jenna, in turn, seemed lost. Louis, dizzy with the sudden swing in tone, tried to gather himself. "With you acting so serious, I thought I was dying." "Oh, no." The doctor immediately grasped the confusion and took a steadying breath. "Listen, everyone who dies in this world becomes a walker within minutes to hours. The agent is everywhere. Being bitten or scratched just speeds that process up dramatically." Louis stood frozen. Dr. Jenna had more to say. "But your blood, I've tested hundreds of thousands of samples. You are the only one who doesn't have the virus." "The only one?" The words landed like a blow. Louis's mind darted. He remembered Dwayne, about how Episky had drained him, wondered whether the healing spell could clear the virus, or perhaps it merely suppressed it and people were re-exposed. Maybe the healing spell helped fight wounds and infections, but didn't eliminate the true agent. There were a dozen complicated possibilities. He waited for the doctor to continue. You mean, Lewis tried to sound hopeful, testing the idea, I won't be infected by the virus? No. Dr. Jenna immediately shook his head. His refusal hit them like a bucket of cold water. Lewis almost failed to hide his disappointment, so it wasn't complete immunity after all. Seeing how relieved Lewis had been, he'd hoped for something miraculous. This is exactly what I want to talk to you about. The doctor pulled Lewis up to the microscope and brought up a comparison image of two samples. I ran cross-experiments, Jenna explained. When your blood is mixed with a high-concentration virus sample, it still becomes infected. It's just that the process is slower than with an ordinary person's sample. This suggests, Jenna concluded, that you may have some kind of natural antibody. It gives you a degree of protection against low concentrations of the virus in the air or water. But if you're bitten or deeply scratched by a walker, if that much virus is injected directly, I'm afraid your antibodies won't be able to resist it. Still, Jenna's breath quickened with excitement. Even so, this is already a miracle. If we use your blood as a blueprint for research, even if we can't immediately crack the virus, we might be able to develop a serum that delays or even blocks the transformation after someone is bitten. He forced himself to calm down, then crouched to Louis's eye level and spoke very seriously. So, Louis, about your condition, except for people you absolutely trust, you must never tell anyone. Why? Louis asked, puzzled. If I'm the hope for a serum, shouldn't everyone try even harder to protect me? He sounded so innocent. My blood isn't anything I can just give away. I have to stay alive for you to have more to study. Dr. Jenna looked at him with a weary shake of his head and began to explain the cruel reality. That's the reaction of someone thinking rationally. But in this apocalypse, how many rational, conscientious people do you think are left? There are plenty of people driven mad by fear and desperation. If someone finds out about you, they won't think in terms of long-term research. They'll think of you as a miracle cure, a talisman that can keep them alive, and they'll try to use you. They might drain your blood or worse. Louis inhaled sharply. His face went pale. Seeing that he finally understood the gravity of the situation, Jenna fell silent. Even the smartest, most reasonable people weren't guaranteed to protect him. Many would be tempted to exploit a living resource who could keep them alive. Then, Louis looked up hesitantly, eyes wide with unease. Will you tell anyone else about this? Jenna's sternness softened into a bitter smile. No. He shook his head. His voice was raw. I will never tell anyone. But, Louis frowned, didn't you stay here to research a cure? That was my wife's mission. Jenna turned away from Louis for a moment. She was the real genius. I'm not. I stayed here because it's the only thing I could do. He went on. The backup power here was already running low. I'd planned to let it run out in a day and end my life here, all of it, painlessly. He paused, then turned back abruptly, a hard light kindling in his eyes. But not you. You're the hope of humanity, Louis. I can't let you be buried here with me. I'll tell the others about the power shortage so you can prepare. There are still supplies and equipment here. Take whatever you can use. He urged him again. If someday you meet a doctor you absolutely trust, maybe then you can tell him. Until then, protect yourself. Louis listened silently. Jenna sounded sincere. There was no obvious deceit. Still, he hadn't let down his guard completely. He'd been given an outline of events to guide him, but he'd learned to be cautious. In the source material that inspired his life, this doctor had had a death wish and a saintly streak. It was possible meeting someone like Jenna could change him again. Louis had to be ready for anything, even if it meant taking desperate measures to protect himself. Fortunately, so far the worst hadn't happened. Jenna seemed trustworthy. Louis weighed things in his mind. Unlike some ultimate secrets that must be buried forever, the matter of this antibody felt different. He could consider telling one or two people he truly trusted. He'd developed basic self-preservation measures and had some understanding of the people around him. More importantly, an antibody like this could only be used if Louis himself remained alive. It wasn't something anyone could simply steal and use. That long-term value would encourage reasonable leaders to protect him rather than kill him. Besides, this antibody wasn't a perfect miracle. He vaguely remembered that in later accounts someone had researched a serum with a similar effect. There might be other paths to the same result. After a moment's thought, Louis looked up. "But doctor, I think you're the best candidate right now." Jenna was taken aback for a second, then laughed and shook his head. "Child, you overestimate me." "I don't know exactly how capable you are," Louis said earnestly, "but I know your character. In the apocalypse, you still risked opening the door for us. When you learned about this, your first impulse was to warn me, not to exploit me. Even if you'd planned not to keep living, it still shows you're at least a kind person. If you're the one researching the virus, I think I can at least keep myself safe." Privately, he mused that this gave him time to hide here for a while, to grow stronger. Later, if he learned ways to erase memories or defend himself, he wouldn't have to worry as much about being a specimen. If Jenna had been a brilliant, unhinged scientist, Louis wouldn't have felt safe staying. What he wanted was exactly this: a competent, not spectacular researcher, a complete lab, and a stable place to stay and grow. "But what about others?" Louis added. "I can't be sure about everyone." Jenna hesitated. That had been his biggest fear. Louis was vulnerable. If he ran into the wrong kind of survivor, he'd be in trouble. Jenna mulled over how trust had been given so readily after only a few honest sentences, and for the first time his resolve wavered. Louis didn't let that moment pass. "Then the best choice is for us to stay here. This place has the most complete facilities and the safest environment. You can do your research, and I can live. We both have a future." As he spoke, he suddenly frowned. "Ah, I forgot the most critical issue: power." He looked at Jenna. "If the power's low, can't we fix it? On the way here, we saw gas stations, and this facility should have clean energy options like hydro, solar, or wind, right?" Jenna was silent for a beat, then looked into Louis' hopeful face and remembered the comforting words spoken over lunch. After a long time, he let out a deep sigh, not of despair this time, but of relief. His gaze grew resolute. "You're right, we've gotten through worse. Now that we have a real chance, there's no reason to give up." Louis felt his heart leap. Did fate turn again in their favor? Jenna stood and clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Let's go. Call everyone to the main control center. I think I have some important things to say." "You just arrived and you're already leaving?" Louis left the lab, his head still buzzing from the flood of information. Rounding the corridor, he saw Shane standing at the entrance to the living area, hesitant, his eyes drifting toward Laurie's room now and then. Louis hurried over. "Uncle Shane?" Shane had been full of words he meant to say to Laurie, and Louis's voice startled him. He cleared his throat and forced a smile. "What's up, kid? Not in bed yet?" "The doctor wants us at the main control center right away," Louis said, grave. "He says he has something very important to announce." "Something important?" Shane's flirtatious mood evaporated. Seeing Louis's expression, he turned serious. "All right, I'll go get everyone." A few minutes later, the whole group, bleary-eyed, gathered in the CDC's main control hall. The big screen bearing the VI logo pulsed quietly. Dr. Jenna stood at the console. Without preamble, he brought up the main power monitoring interface. "I think you have the right to know what we're facing," he said. A glaring countdown filled the screen. Less than a day of energy remaining. "This is the wildfire protocol," Dr. Jenna announced. "When the CDC's main power is exhausted, the building initiates a top-level decontamination." "Decontamination? What does that mean?" Glenn asked. Dr. Jenna looked at him evenly. "It means this place will self-destruct, a high-intensity thermobaric detonation, enough to burn everything here, including us, to ashes." "What?" people shouted. "Are you kidding me?" The announcement hit the survivors like a bomb. Horror and disbelief swept the room. Merle jabbed a metal cabinet with his foot. "Water, electricity, medical gear, like paradise. And if we stay too long, we end up in heaven," he barked. Daryl spat. "You're dreaming pretty big. I think you're going to hell." "Oh no." Carol hugged Sophia to her chest. Ed clenched his jaw, wanting to speak. He'd been absent when earlier decisions were made, but he swallowed his words and fell silent, remembering the last time he stuck his neck out. "I thought this was the safest place," Jacques murmured. A former city planning official with short black hair, she had some technical knowledge of the facility. "Yes," Dr. Jenna finished for her, a wryness in his voice. "And soon to be the safest tomb." We can't have a facility like this running only on diesel generators, Jackie said, eyes bright with the question. There should be solar panels on the roof as a backup. There were, Jenna said. Or rather, there were. He went on. When the military abandoned the city, there was heavy crossfire here. The roof's solar array was damaged. The main cables to the energy storage were cut. Even if the panels had survived, weeks of fires and explosions have left the roof under a layer of soot and debris. Whatever power they could generate now might not even light these room lamps, let alone support the whole facility. After a stunned silence, Rick was the first to compose himself enough to ask the question everyone feared. You called us here just to tell us that? There has to be another plan. Dr. Jenna nodded. You have two choices. First, rest here one last night. At dawn, take as many supplies as you can and leave. And the other? Rick pressed. Dr. Jenna pulled up another interface. The other is a manual procedure I call zone decontamination, he explained. Wildfire is designed to destroy everything. Zone decontamination is a hands-on plan. We avoid detonating the whole building and instead run the high-temperature incineration on the specific lab where the virus samples are stored. Merle's eyes lit up. Then get on with it. Turn it on, and this can still be our base. It's not that simple, Jenna said. Zone decontamination consumes huge amounts of power continuously to run the high-temp incinerators. If we can destroy the virus lab before the wildfire protocol triggers, I might be able to abort the self-destruct. But I don't know if the remaining fuel is enough, and I don't know how the AI will react if energy consumption spikes during the process. Wait, T-Dog blurted. We brought a lot of diesel from the gas station. Can't we use that? Even if you can feed in more diesel, Jenna answered, I don't think it's enough to eliminate the risk. He looked around at them. There's a high probability the system will misinterpret the energy draw. If zone decontamination starts, it could automatically trigger the wildfire countdown. That's still a dead end then. Shane's face went white. It might be a dead end, Jenna admitted, but there's also a chance. The incineration could finish before the energy runs out, and I could cancel wildfire before the countdown ends. So if the plan goes through, you'd have to stay here, Rick said slowly, realization settling in. If it fails, I never planned on surviving this anyway, the doctor said calmly. This is my way to buy you a future. Silence pressed down. They all understood what he meant. It was almost certainly a suicide mission. You could come with us, Rick offered, hesitant. There are always other ways out. This is my best way out, Dr. Jenna replied. His gaze swept the group, resting finally on Rick and Louie. I have to stay and finish the work. You must leave. If I succeed, this can be your safest home. If I fail, you'll never have to come back. It's nearly night, Shane protested. There are walkers out there. We just got settled. Why can't we wait until dawn to leave? We can't wait, Jenna said firmly. The sooner we start, the better. We don't know when the energy will hit the critical point. There's no time to waste. Then we stay in the cars outside the main gate, Glenn suggested. If it works, we'll know immediately. No, Jenna said. When zone decontamination starts, it will be loud and it will draw every walker in range. You can't be nearby. Leaving right after they'd arrived, and in the worst hour of the night, each option felt worse than the other. They looked at one another, the problem closing in. Rick glanced at Laurie and Carl, then at Lewis. He swallowed and made his choice. We're leaving. 64, second time. But where are we going? Shane asked. Rick looked around at everyone. We can't just run around like headless chickens. Maybe we can go find our friends in town. What do you think, Glenn? Yeah! Glenn's eyes lit up. That nursing home. Andrea hesitated. She'd heard what had happened between Rick's group and the nursing home. She still thought of them as kidnappers who aren't bad people. But they're struggling too, right? How can you be sure they'll take us in? Daryl and Merle rolled their eyes. They were about to bring up Rick's glorious gesture of handing over half the guns, but T-Dog beat them to it. They like Lewis a lot. Lewis saved one of their people back then. Lewis nodded. I did fix a few folks up. That was enough. Rick turned to Dr. Jenner, his gaze steady. We're going to that nursing home to regroup and maybe pick up other survivors. When we come back, I hope you'll open the door for us. Jenner looked at Rick for a long moment, then slowly nodded. A faint spark of something like hope rekindled in his eyes. If I'm still alive, and if this place still exists, I will. He turned back to the console and entered the highest level credentials. V, open the main entrance. With a heavy rumbling, the outer shutter that had been permanently sealed began to lift. There was no time for sentiment. They had work to do. They first moved the limited diesel they had to the energy room, at least one more sliver of hope. Then everyone hurriedly loaded supplies. The CDC's stores were beyond what they'd expected. Unsure if Jenner's plan would succeed, they took everything they could carry. To spread risk on the road, Rick and Shane made a quick decision and found a few more working cars in the parking garage. While everyone loaded the vehicles, Dr. Jenner found Louis in the chaos, secretly handed him a compact pistol and several smoke grenades, and whispered for him to stay safe. Dwayne, who had been trailing them, watched the exchange with obvious envy. His parents had never let him touch these grown-up toys. Louis saw Dwayne's wide-eyed, hopeful expression and couldn't help but smile. He thought for a moment, then unbuckled a pocket knife from his waist and handed it, along with a coil of rope, to the boy. You can play with this for a while, but no hurting people. No problem. Dwayne took it like it was a treasure and hid it in his shirt. With that small moment managed, Louis climbed onto Dale's RV. With the supplies loaded, the group gathered in the lobby with food, water, and medical gear that far outstripped what they'd arrived with, and with mixed emotions. Just as Rick was about to step out, Dr. Jenner pulled him back. He didn't look at Rick. He looked long at Louis, who was being escorted toward the RV by Lori, and said in a voice that allowed no argument, "Rick, no matter what, you must protect the children. They are the future of humanity." Rick blinked, then nodded heavily. The engines roared at sunset as the convoy set off on another unknown journey. The massive shutter door eased down behind them with a dull, final thud. Inside the main control room, Dr. Jenner stood alone in front of the giant countdown clock and stared at the zone decontamination start indicator lighting up on the screen. His expression was, unexpectedly, resolute. Louis sat in the bumping RV, watching the CDC's doors recede through the rear window. His heart was a jumble of hope and anxiety. "Doctor, you have to make it," he murmured to himself. If Jenner could really run Protocol 1 and deactivate the self-destruct before their power ran out, it would change everything for them. In the original series, Rick's group had been a walking disaster. Wherever they went, something went wrong. From the CDC to the farm, to the prison, and on to Alexandria, places that could have become stable strongholds were ruined by accidents and conflicts. When Louis had watched the show, the constant movement and fighting made for good drama. It was exciting. But now that this was his life, he didn't want to repeat that pattern. He wanted a safe, stable place to settle, where he could develop his skills in peace, study potions, research, and maybe learn more about his own body. He hadn't expected Dr. Jenner's plan to have a real chance. He'd only suggested it as a what-if. But it made sense that a top-tier biological research institute would have backup energy and emergency decontamination protocols. In the original timeline, Jenner had seemed to be resigned to death. He never mentioned those options. Louis' presence had given the doctor something to fight for. If all goes south and the CDC can't be saved, Louis thought, then we'll have to consider the prison or the farm again. He was still thinking when the convoy slowed and finally stopped. "What's wrong?" Andrea asked Dale in the driver's seat. Dale's voice had gone cautious. "Ahead. Looks like someone's getting robbed." 65. Change Louis scrambled out of bed and went to the window. Not far down the road, two hard-looking men, one with a baseball bat and the other with a pistol, were shoving a woman clutching a child, clearly trying to snatch her backpack. Bang! Rick and Shane were already out of the car. Shane fired a warning shot into the air. The two robbers saw the convoy's strength, Rick's crew, plus Merle and Daryl looming in the back with weapons, and bolted into the roadside woods, disappearing. The woman holding the child cried out and ran toward them. "Thank you. Thank you for saving us." She looked to be in her 30s, face streaked with dirt but otherwise energetic. The child in her arms, 5 or 6 years old, stared at them with wide, curious eyes. "Please, take us with you," she begged, collapsing to her knees. "It's just the two of us, mother and son. Those men will come back. Please. Jenny and Lori, in the other vehicles, looked wounded with pity. Lewis, however, was speechless. What's this? Another performance? In 2 days, he'd seen this twice. Same lines, same act. Shane looked unsettled too, about to speak, but Rick cut in first. He looked down at the woman and shook his head. Sorry, we can't take strangers. Gratitude on the woman's face froze into shock, then gave way to tears. We haven't eaten in days. The child is starving. I'm alone. Dale climbed out of the RV and, unable to stand it, tried to reason with Rick. Rick, if you can't take them in, at least let them ride in the car. Just get them away from the robbers. Are you crazy, old man? Daryl snapped from a window of another vehicle. Have you already forgotten that bastard Martin at the gas station so quickly? That's different, Dale insisted. We can't ignore every innocent person who needs help because of one bad apple. Rick remained unmoved. He ignored the argument, took a few cans and a bottle of water from the truck, and handed them to the woman. Take these and leave as soon as you can. The woman's face crumpled at the refusal. You can't do this, she cried. She didn't take the food, but shouted, frantic, if you leave food here, they'll come back and snatch it once you drive off. And it's getting dark. How am I supposed to survive alone with a child? Rick showed no emotion. He set the food on the ground and turned back toward the truck. Rick, Dale called, still trying. Rick ignored him, pulled open the door, and got in. Dale met Rick's flat, unyielding gaze, sighed, and climbed back into the RV. Reluctantly, everyone left. You're going to hell, you heartless bastards, the woman screamed, her voice fading behind the convoy. The cab fell quiet and heavy. Shane gripped the wheel and finally broke the silence. I thought you'd let her in. I'm not an idiot, Rick said. That Martin at the gas station, he looked perfect on the surface. He nearly fooled even me. Rick's voice went cold. This woman, she's dirty, but her complexion's not pale. She sounds strong. And that kid, no crying, just staring, not even afraid. I don't know their intentions, but it's probably a trap. Shane wasn't surprised. He smirked in the rearview mirror. Heh, thought your brief hospital stay scrambled your head. At least you didn't forget how to read people as a cop, Morales teased from the back. A few low laughs went around. Rick shook his head. I left the food to avoid complications. We have children and elderly in our group. If they have accomplices hiding nearby, it would be trouble. No need to pick a fight. Leaving them some supplies and being done with it was the best outcome. In the RV's back seat, Louis watched everything unfold. He felt both a little awed and convinced. A group that only ever showed kindness wouldn't last. You had to learn to distinguish friend from foe, to refuse and to choose if you wanted to survive this. May your judgment temper your mercy, Officer Rick, Louis thought, then yawned, pulled his blanket up, and tried to sleep. None of them could have guessed that this small interlude was a warning before disaster. The convoy rolled down the highway, and behind them the woman Rick had rejected rose slowly from the shoulder, the despair gone from her face. It was replaced by a near-devout coldness. She glanced at the cans and water Rick had left, kicked them aside with contempt, then slipped into the trees and took out a walkie-talkie. This is Observer, she said, voice stripped of weakness. Target convoy has departed. They refused shelter to a mother and her child. A hoarse male voice crackled back. Result? They're hypocritical, selfish, and indifferent, she said. Target confirmed evil. Received, the voice hesitated. We shall judge their sins. May they accept judgment. She clicked the walkie-talkie off and melted deeper into the woods with the child. About 10 minutes later, they rounded a bend and found a massive oil tanker had overturned, completely blocking the highway. The convoy ground to a halt. Several people immediately jumped out of their vehicles, guns up, scanning the tree line. Rick's years on the force sharpened a warning in his gut. His heart skipped a beat. Something's wrong, he muttered. Everyone stay in the cars! Watch the flanks! He had just motioned to the vehicles behind him to prepare for a fight when a flare shot into the sky with a shrill scream. Boom! Instantly, militants opened up from the high ground and the woods on both sides of the road. Get down! Rick roared, ducking behind the vehicle as bullets peppered the convoy. He noticed something strange. Most of the enemy fire was aimed low, shredding tires and denting hoods. They're shooting the tires, he yelled to Shane. The first few vehicles had their tires blown out and were rendered immobile. Rick realized with growing dread that whoever was attacking wanted them alive. He met the terrified faces behind him, gritted his teeth, and took a gamble. "Shane, cover me!" He leaned out, pistol aimed low, and raised a hand high to show he meant no harm. "Don't shoot," he shouted toward the high ground. "We mean no harm. There are children and elderly in our cars. We're just passing through." For a moment, his plea hung in the air. Then a cold laugh and a voice crackled through a loudspeaker. "You sinners, drop your resistance immediately. Accept judgment." Panic spread. "I can't take this anymore," someone in a rear car cried. Ed flung his door open and bolted for the tree line. "I don't want to die. I'm getting out of here." "Ed, come back," Carol screamed. Ed's flight sparked others. A few survivors followed, running blindly toward the woods. Bang, bang, bang! Bullets cut them down. Some fell dead where they ran. Others dragged themselves, screaming, until armed men from the trees dragged them away. Only Ed and one or two others managed to disappear into the forest. "If you remain stubborn," the loudspeaker intoned again, authoritative and cruel, "this is your fate." "Look behind you," the voice added. Rick turned, his pupils constricted. A rocket streaked from the high ground and slammed the RV at the rear of the convoy. "No," he screamed. The RV erupted in fire. Dale fought the wheel, but the vehicle smashed through the guardrail, rolled down the embankment, and vanished into the trees in a black column of smoke. The screams from the RV were swallowed by the explosion. Louis, Dale, Andrea, Amy, the names blurred in Rick's head. The world narrowed to a high, keening ringing in his ears. He felt someone grab his arm. Something roared at him. He raised his gun like an animal and prepared to bolt out from behind cover. "Rick?" Morales tackled him, wrapping his arms around Rick's waist, hauling him down behind the car. "Calm down. God damn it. Calm down." "Let go of me," Rick spat, eyes wild. Morales pinned him hard. "The car didn't flip at speed. The slope's not too steep. They might still be alive. But if you rush out there, you'll get yourself killed." While holding Rick, Morales barked orders to the rear. "T-Dog, Daryl, stop the others. They have the high ground. Going out there is suicide." A hail of bullets traced a line of fire inches from where Rick struggled, sending gravel and dust into Morales' face. "You want to try it again?" Someone sneered from above. The loudspeaker's contempt nearly broke Rick free, but a cry cut through his fury. Lori, shielding little Carl, was sobbing, her face wet with tears as she begged him with her eyes. Morales' voice came softer now. "Think about the others." Rick looked at Carl's pale face, then at the smoking embankment. The rage that had seized him ebbed into helplessness. He let go. His weapon clattered to the ground. "We surrender." The militants swarmed forward, disarming and binding Rick, Shane, and the others. A man in a tactical mask and bulletproof vest stepped out, a clear leader. He spoke coldly to his men. "Marge, Ben, take some people and check the vehicles. See if there are any survivors." A young woman with neat short hair and a fitted vest stepped forward. Marge. She and two others moved down the row, checking the disabled cars. She opened the door of a rear-ended sedan and peered inside. Adults and children slumped among shattered glass and blood. One of the occupants, an Asian man, twitched a finger. Marge paused for a second, then shut the door as if she hadn't seen it. "Let's go back," she called to her companions. "They're all dead." One of the tall, thin men hesitated. "Shouldn't we at least check the RV?" Marge's cold look cut him off. "It's getting dark. The smell of blood will attract walkers." Her tone was dismissive. That RV was full of the old, the weak, the sick. Even if there are survivors, they won't last long. The man fell silent and trailed back to report to the leader with her. Just as Marge finished telling the leader everything was clear, the tall, thin man blurted out, "The overturned RV hasn't been checked." Everyone froze. Bound on the ground, Rick craned his neck, bloodshot eyes fixed on the man. A guard slammed a rifle butt into Rick's back. "Behave yourself, sinner." Rick groaned, but ignored the pain. The leader turned toward Marge, his masked voice threaded with warning. "Marge?" 67. Midnight Escape. Marge's face showed no panic. Meeting the leader's gaze, she replied calmly, "The old man driving the RV is the one who begged for the 5 before. Although he didn't press it, he still has a conscience," Marge said coldly. "So I think his fate can be left for God to decide." The leader looked satisfied and nodded slowly. "But there must be supplies in there." Ben, a tall, thin man, shot back eagerly, unwilling to give up. Supplies? Marge finally turned to him. Never mind how much is left inside. It's getting dark. Do you want our people surrounded by tens just so you can run down that slope and lug stuff back and forth? She pointed to the smoking wreck of the RV. Besides, that thing just blew up. Who knows if it'll go off again? If you're not afraid of dying, go yourself. Ben fell silent, clutching his mouth in resentment. Fine. Don't go then. The leader waved him off. Only then did Rick let his rigid nerves loosen for a heartbeat. He grit his teeth, letting the sharp pain in his back wash over him, thinking only one thing. Louis, you have to stay alive. I swear I'll get out and come back for you. Very well. The leader lifted his hand. Take the captives and strip their supplies. We're heading back to prepare for the trial. The militants swarmed the remaining vehicles like locusts. They shoved the captives into trucks and began looting. Boss, look, these people came loaded. Damn, so much medical stuff and food. One militant dragged a crate of canned goods from the truck, the very supplies they'd risked their lives to bring from the CDC. He kicked the crate over, sending cans rolling, and spat at the bound T-Dog. Look at you greedy sinners, hoarding supplies and not sharing with desperate mothers. Your souls have rotted, shameless. Rick, Shane, Daryl, and the others watched with bloodshot eyes as the men took everything they'd fought for, the medicine and food from the CDC, the firearms and weapons. Whatever they couldn't load immediately, they put new tires on the vehicles and drove off with the cargo. Move, the leader ordered, and the convoy's engines roared to life, taking away Rick's team's weapons and supplies toward an unknown destination. After some time, only silence remained on the highway, broken by the distant gathering roars of tens. Inside the car they'd assumed was dead, Glenn forced his eyes open. He sucked in air, drenched in sweat. When that woman had checked earlier, she clearly saw he was alive, but why hadn't she reported it? Are they gone? A trembling voice asked from the back seat. It was Miranda, Morales' wife. She had smeared blood on Glenn and herself to play dead when things went south, pulling him back from trying to fight. They're gone, Glenn rasped. He pushed the door open. We have to get out of here now. As he stepped out, he heard a muffled sob nearby and snapped to alert, gripping his pistol as he followed the sound. Beside an SUV lay a 10-10 felled by a stray bullet, and the sobbing came from beneath its corpse. Glenn shoved the rotting body aside. Sophia was curled up under it, covered in black blood and mud, her small face pale and frozen with terror. Oh God, Glenn breathed. Sophia! Miranda's 2 children ran over. The little girl handed Sophia a doll she had been clutching, trying to comfort her. Sophia broke down. Mom hid me here. She told me not to make a sound. Glenn's chest tightened. He gathered Sophia and looked at Miranda and the 2 frightened kids. Glenn, Louis, and the others. Miranda glanced toward the woods where black smoke rose. Dale, Amy, Andrea, and Louis. Everyone had been in that RV. Glenn had to go down. He told Miranda to hide with the children, then slid down the steep slope toward the wreckage. The overturned RV in the trees was a wreck. The smell of gasoline and burning was thick. Dale clutched his bleeding forehead and tried to focus. Amy? Andrea woke slowly, shaking her head, then froze in horror. Amy. She searched the cluttered cabin and found her younger sister collapsed under a seat. Amy's abdomen was a bloody ruin, her clothes soaked. She was unconscious. No, Amy. Andrea sobbed and reached for her. Don't move her. An unusually calm voice cut across her panic. Louis leaned against the opposite wall of the RV, pale and dazed, but probably the least injured of them. During the overturn, Amy had used her body to shield him from most of the impact and taken the brunt of the injuries herself. Andrea turned to him, collapsing into tears. Louis, Calm down, she's alive, Louis said, stopping her. A piece of rebar pierced her side and she lost a lot of blood, but while you were out, I already performed emergency first aid. He explained quickly, not mentioning that he'd used a healing spell amid the chaos. The wound looked horrific, but had stopped bleeding heavily. No vital organs were hit. She just lost a lot of blood and hit her head. Louis? Andrea? Dale? Glenn's voice came from outside the cracked windshield. Glenn! Dale cried and struggled to his feet. How are the others? They've all been taken, Glenn said, forcing himself into the RV. The words hit Dale like a blow. He nearly collapsed. Ed and a few others ran into the woods. Status unknown. Glenn's voice shook. Now it's just me, Sophia, Miranda, and her two kids. Now is not the time for this. Louis pushed down the despair and propped himself up, scanning the woods. It's almost dark. The gunfire and explosions earlier will draw every nearby 10. We can't stay. But where do we go? Dale asked, panic edging his voice. Amy needs treatment. Glenn, do you know this area? Oh God, I was just a pizza delivery guy in the city. Why would you think I know the woods? Glenn rasped. He tried to remember. I saw a map on the way. If I recall, there should be a church nearby, but I have no damn clue how to find it. 68. Farm horror. Just as everyone sank into despair, Miranda's voice came from outside. Maybe this can help. She had returned with the children, carrying a folded local map and a small compass. I grabbed these from the emergency cabinet when I left the CDC. She handed over a black weapons bag. And these. There aren't any guns, but it's better than nothing. Seeing the map and the makeshift weapons, Andrea's taut nerves eased a little. She managed a pale smile. Thank you, Miranda. You're always so thoughtful, so calm. Miranda's hand trembled as she handed out the weapons. Her smile was brittle. Calm? I'm just holding it together. She bowed her head, and there was a catch in her voice. The kids are watching me. I just hope Morales and the others are okay. Andrea saw the shaking hands, the reddened eyes, and thought of Amy, of those taken away. Her mood dropped again. Me too. The room sank back into gloom. Whether they're okay or not, a steady voice cut through the silence. We can't let anything happen to ourselves right now. Louis had crawled out of the wreckage. He looked over the demoralized group. Rick and the others are strong. There's no point in sitting here and brooding. The most important thing is to protect Amy and find somewhere to settle, even if only temporarily. We have to pull ourselves together. If we steady ourselves now, we stand a chance of finding them later. Dale glanced at Louis, ashamed. The recent blows had shaken him. He hadn't expected that. At a time like this, they'd need a young man to steady the group. Sophia clutched her rag doll and whispered, My mom, will she be okay? Louis met her eyes. I don't know. His voice softened. But your mother hid you so you would live. She's strong, so you must be strong too. Stay close to us, okay? Sophia's tears glistened as she nodded. Okay. Louis stood. We've got more important things to do. He started giving orders. Glenn, Grandpa Dale, there should still be usable curtain fabric in the RV. Aunt Miranda, please find a few intact poles with the kids. Under Louis's direction, everyone swallowed their grief and fear and began to move. Soon they fashioned a crude stretcher and carefully lifted Amy onto it. Wait! Louis halted them as they prepared to leave. He glanced up at the sky. Walkers get more active at night. We should camouflage her. He reached for a dagger and moved toward a walker's corpse, bracing against the nausea at the thought of cutting into it. I'll do it. Andrea stopped him. She wiped tears and grime from her face, drew a machete from the bag Miranda had handed over, and then, as if to expel all the panic and anger inside her, brought the blade down again and again on the rotting corpse. Black blood and spattered flesh splattered the ground. The sight made several people turn away. There were no raincoats left in the RV, so they pulled various large coats and jackets together. In silence, they smeared the gore on the fabric and wrapped Amy on the stretcher. Everything was nearly ready when a voice called from the edge of the woods. Hey, are you okay over there? Everyone snapped their weapons up and trained them toward the sound. A plump man in a camouflage baseball cap stepped out from behind a tree with his hands raised. Don't shoot, my name's Otis. I live nearby. He hurried to explain, earnest in his tone. I heard the explosion and came to check. Glenn and the others kept their muzzles level, eyes wary. Your friends were taken, right? Otis pointed toward the road, anger and shared outrage in his face. I saw it. Those bastards call themselves the Believers. They're no good. He looked at Amy on the stretcher, his face turning serious. You can't survive the night in the woods with a wounded person and kids. I know a place that's safe. There's a doctor there. He might be able to help her. Why should we trust you? Glenn asked, gripping his gun. He was the only young adult male in the ragged group and felt the burden of responsibility. We'll go with you, Louis said, interrupting. He stood up beside Glenn and nodded toward Otis. The nod calmed something in Glenn. He relaxed a fraction. Everyone exchanged looks. Lead the way, Mr. Otis, Louis said. They lifted Amy and followed. The patched-together party, Lewis, Glenn, Dale, Andrea, Miranda, Otis, and the three children, trudged through the dark woods, carrying the injured woman and leaving the walker's groans behind. Glenn and Andrea took the stretcher ends. Whether it was the adrenaline or relief, their steps felt a little lighter than the weight of the body should have allowed. Otis guided them to a farm surrounded by a high fence. A grave-faced older man with a white beard stood at the gate holding a lantern. He had clearly been warned. Otis had radioed ahead. "Quick, bring her in," the man barked. The farm owner, Herschel, saw the wound and immediately ordered them into the house. A young woman ran out with the medical kit Herschel had asked for, and Otis's wife brought hot water and towels. Herschel examined Amy, his expression tightening at the injury. "I'll do what I can." Louis reported, "She's lost a lot of blood. She might need a transfusion. Do you have anything for that?" Herschel glanced at the makeshift bandaging and the hurried emergency care already given, and the shock showed in his eyes. "We have stored blood bags. I don't know about a match." "I have the same blood type," Andrea said without hesitation. "Good," Herschel replied. "You come with me for the transfusion. Everyone else wait in the living room." They pulled the bedroom door closed and filed into the warm, lit living room. For the first time since the explosion, people let out a long, shaky breath. The light and warmth felt like a fragile thing to hold, but it was enough for now. Miranda and Dale sat with the children, Ruff, who had dozed off from exhaustion on the sofa. Glenn, however, couldn't sit still. He paced the room, trying to distract himself by studying the furnishings. Then he stopped, his eyes fixed on a family portrait hanging above the fireplace. In the photograph, a short-haired girl smiled at the camera, the same woman who had earlier inspected Glenn's corpse on the highway and let them pass. Marge. Glenn's voice trembled as he pointed at the picture. "She." Herschel came out of the bedroom, weary but composed. "All right, your companion is out of danger." Before he could finish, Glenn lunged forward, voice raw. "What the hell is going on? Is she your daughter? Are you working with those bastards?" 69. Butterfly Storm. "What?" The word cut through the room. Hands tightened on weapons. Dale and Andrea instinctively braced, while Miranda moved to shelter the sleeping children. Louis felt a jolt of alarm as well. He had expected his arrival to cause some ripple, but never something this big. First, a squad of heavily armed men calling themselves the Believers had appeared out of nowhere. Now the farm, a neutral place in the original story, was tangled up with them. Louis forced himself to breathe. He remembered Herschel's guilt-worn face and Otis's anger back in the woods. If Otis had risked himself to help them, these people couldn't all be on the same side. Louis needed answers before he reached any conclusions. "Glenn, wait!" he called out. Glenn had already surged forward, hands reaching for Herschel's collar, but Louis grabbed his arm and held him back. He turned to the old man and spoke evenly. "Mr. Herschel, we were ambushed by those people. They took half our group and blew up our RV with a rocket launcher." He pointed to the photo on the wall. "Your daughter is in that picture. Mr. Otis saved us and said they were no good. What exactly is going on? We need the truth." Under that questioning gaze, Herschel seemed to age a decade. He closed his eyes, slumped against the wall, and sighed. "You're right," he rasped. "This is all my fault." He told them everything. "About a month ago," Herschel began, "my son, the young man next to Marge in the photo, brought back some survivors from the road. They were good people. The leader was a history professor named Lee. He was with a little girl. There was a couple, Paul and Karina, and Kenny and his family." Louis felt his pulse skip. "Professor Lee told me," Herschel went on, "that before they made it here, they'd saved a man who called himself the Shepherd. A few days later, the Shepherd came to the farm with armed men and a big cache of supplies. He said he'd come to repay the favor." Herschel's voice tightened. At first, he seemed so devout. He praised the farm, called it God's promised land, said I was a righteous man. I was flattered, foolishly blinded by it. He invited us, Professor Lee and the others, to join his sanctuary. Lee and the others saw through him. They thought he was a fanatic, warned me to take my family and leave right away. Herschel's shoulders hunched. "I wouldn't leave. This farm is everything I have. I told them no, that it couldn't be that bad. So they left. They thought it would turn dangerous. But I didn't listen." Herschel's voice broke with shame. "Soon enough, The shepherd showed his colors. He demanded we give large quantities of food as offerings, or be judged. We couldn't possibly meet his demands, so he offered us a choice: join his group and work for our rations. The main men in the Believers were trained, armed, soldiers really. We had no way to resist. He took my son and my daughter, Marge. The hostility in the room thawed into stunned silence. Glenn's expression shifted as realization hit him. No wonder she didn't tell me when she saw I was alive. Miranda, who'd been watching everything while feigning sleep in the vehicle, spoke up. She studied Herschel. Your daughter doesn't seem to be treated like a low-ranking hostage. She recounted the exchange she'd overheard in the RV. A man named Ben had suggested checking the RV, and Marge dismissed it in a few words. The leader accepted that suggestion without hesitation. From the way Marge shut it down, she hadn't sounded like someone new to the group or someone being held against her will. Herschel's face tightened. He avoided Miranda's eyes. Maybe it's because I'm friends with Professor Lee and the others, he said weakly. Those Believers have their self-righteous dogmas. Louis let the excuse slide for the moment. His brain was racing through names. Lee, the little girl, Kenny, trying to stitch the pieces together. He cut in. Mr. Herschel, what were the full names of the people you mentioned? Herschel thought a moment. The couple was Paul and Karina. The history professor is Lee. The little girl is Clementine. There's Kenny and his wife. When Herschel said Kenny's name, his eyes dimmed with guilt again, but Louis didn't linger on it. A realization crashed into him like a wave. He hadn't played the game in his previous life. His old computer couldn't handle it, but he knew the stories. Lee and Clementine were the protagonists of that game. Everything clicked. He'd saved Paul and Karina. That couple had met the game's protagonists and joined them. That mixed group had saved a man on the road, the shepherd, who in the original timeline would have died. But here he survived, gathered followers, and founded the fanatical Believers. They preyed on Herschel's kindness, taking Marge and his son. And that scout, Martin, at the gas station, judging by his behavior, was probably working for the Believers too. Anger flared hot and fast in Louis. In his past life, he'd learned a hard truth. Kindness doesn't always beget good. He'd also learned another harsh rule. If goodwill gets abused, force becomes a language some people understand. These people had stolen supplies, captured core members, and almost killed them. He wasn't the same man he had been when he first came through. He wouldn't stand for it. Louis? Glenn asked, watching him. What is it? It's nothing. Louis forced a calm smile. I knew Paul and Karina from Harrison Hospital. I'm surprised they ended up here. His heart was racing. He needed to act. Turning back to Herschel, Louis kept his voice steady. Do you know where their base is? Herschel blinked and answered on instinct. An abandoned factory in the suburbs. It's a little ways out. The suburbs, a factory. Perfect. Louis nodded to himself and met the old man's eyes with a resolve that left no room for doubt. Those people took my companions, he said, looking around at everyone. I'm going to find a way to get them back. 70. Thanks to our kindness. Rick's hood was ripped off so hard it stung. A searchlight stabbed into his face from above, forcing his eyes shut for a moment. He was kneeling in the center of a vast, empty factory workshop. The cold concrete gave off the sour tang of rust and engine oil. Shadows all around were filled with guards with firearms. Metal walkways above were packed with people. Dark muzzles pointed down at them. On one side of the workshop, behind stacked containers and wire mesh marked safe zone, a crowd of survivors had gathered, mostly the elderly, the weak, women, and children. Rick scanned quickly. Everyone from his group was kneeling with their hands bound behind them. Lori, Carl, Shane, Daryl, Merle, T-Dog, Jackie, the Morgans, and others. He checked more carefully. Aside from Ed and a few scattered escapees, only those who'd been in their vehicles had been captured. Glenn, Sophia, Miranda, and her children were not among the prisoners. Rick's heart thudded with relieved hope. He wasn't counting on Glenn to break them out. If Glenn and Miranda had really gotten away, maybe they could rescue the people in the RV. He didn't let himself picture the worst about that overturned vehicle. He forced himself to believe Morales had been right. They hadn't flipped at high speed. There was still a chance. Glenn would find a way. Louis, that boy would be okay. He swallowed, tamping down the turbulence inside him. A hard flash of intent passed through his blue eyes. He would find a way to lead the rest out of this factory hell. "Look, sinners!" someone from the safe zone shouted. Rick turned. The middle-aged woman who'd been traveling on the highway with the child they'd left, the one they'd turned away, was at the front of the crowd, pointing at them with contempt. More new sinners. Not a single sign of repentance. Whispers swelled until a figure stepped into the center of the searchlight's halo. He wore ordinary work clothes and had a plain face, but his eyes held a fanatical calm. He was the shepherd. Quiet. He raised a hand and the murmurs died instantly. Through a loudspeaker, his voice flowed smooth and composed. "My children, today we have found a group of souls who only take and never give thanks in this apocalypse." He descended the stairs, pacing slowly in front of Rick and the others. "Our people found your vehicles, full of food, medicine, fuel. In a world of famine, you, 20-odd people, hoarded those supplies." He turned and spoke loudly to the watching believers. "What is that? Greed." "That's right, greed," the crowd answered. The shepherd pointed at the middle-aged woman. "My observer, a helpless mother holding her young son, begged you for shelter by the roadside. And you, driving nearly empty vehicles, rejected her without hesitation, tossing down a few cans like she was a beggar. What is this? Indifference, selfishness." The crowd grew angrier. The shepherd walked up to Rick and knelt as if confiding. "Our young brother Martin, he was a lost young man who made a mistake. He wanted to join you, and you." He straightened, his voice rising. "You brutally murdered him. You crushed his skull in the dark and left him in the ruins to die. This is murder. That's a lie." Daryl snapped first, jerking his head up, veins standing in his neck. "That bastard was your scout. He was a goddamn bandit. We found his notebook." The shepherd did not flare with anger. He wore pity like a cloak. A notebook? Perhaps it was a wanderer's diary. You only see what you want to see. "He was just a lost boy," the shepherd said, charisma pouring into his words. "He made a mistake, but you refused to give him a chance to repent. You are not even as merciful as God." "That was a fucking accident," T-Dog roared. "The ceiling fell and crushed him. You brain-dead idiots who can't understand human speech." "Alas," the shepherd shook his head. "Lies and denial will only make your sins heavier." Rick felt his chest drop. How could people be so shameless? Martin had gotten what he deserved. As for the woman, they hadn't admitted her, but they'd helped drive off the bandits and left food and water. How had that become a crime to these people? "Morgan," Rick heard himself try, making one last attempt through his family. "We didn't know your rules. But we couldn't just let strangers into our cars without knowing who they were." Jenny hurried in. "We have our own children." The middle-aged woman laughed, thin and sharp. "What danger did we pose? We were a defenseless mother and son." She glared at Jenny. "Are your children the only children that matter? Are other people's children not important?" The two were struck silent for a moment. Reasoning with these people was useless. Rick tried another tack. "If you need someone to judge, then I'm the only sinner." "All the decisions were mine," Rick said, holding the shepherd's gaze. "I was the one who turned that woman away and who allocated our supplies. They're not guilty." "Bullshit, Rick," Shane growled. "Don't act like you feel any guilt. Stop talking crap." "No, Rick." Lori shook her head, tears in her eyes. Rick ignored them and pressed on. "They were only following my orders, trying to survive." "Is that so?" the middle-aged woman sneered. "If they were innocent, why did not one of them stand up for me back then? They watched you leave me behind without a word." "Just as you respect your shepherd," Rick shot back. "In our group, my word carries weight. Even if anyone was unhappy, they wouldn't contradict me in front of strangers. They are innocent." "You have a child. You know how hard it is to survive outside," the woman said. She looked at Rick. "Was it any different for the others on the vehicles? At least let the women and children go." "Ha!" Daryl suddenly spat at the woman. "The only old man who stood up for you, wasn't he blown to pieces by your rocket launcher? Huh?" He let out a wordless roar. "You have the fucking nerve to say that?" A guard's boot connected with Daryl's back. He went down hard but still stared like a man prepared to die. "Daryl!" Merle's eyes were wild. The woman's face paled. Daryl's words had struck a nerve she couldn't answer. The shepherd began to clap slowly. "Well said." He walked up to Rick. "But you are wrong." He swept his arms toward the gathered believers. Here we are equal, and we respect one another. I understand what they think, and they heed my voice. No one is forced to obey anyone else. If the people in your vehicles were truly as innocent as you claim, why did none of them speak up for that woman? Why did they remain silent? As for that old man, he shook his head, he was even more contemptible. Though he contradicted you, he could not follow through. He promised hope and then snuffed it out with his own hands. Such behavior is nothing but self-righteous show. It is hypocrisy at its worst. We should have executed you sinners on the spot, the shepherd told his believers, but we are merciful. We will give you a chance to face judgment. He raised his arm high. Be grateful for our mercy, sinners. I said you are guilty. I said you are guilty. Face the judgment. Face the judgment. The crowd and the guards erupted in a frenzy, throwing up their hands and chanting like broken records, eyes glazed with adoration for the shepherd. Rage trembled through them. Mercy? They were only afraid of a fight that might cause casualties. They'd stolen everything and now called it mercy. The shepherd put a hand down and the noise stopped, like someone cutting a wire. He looked at the captives with satisfaction and smiled. Now we will perform the trial on the one among you whose sins are most profound. What the hell is that? T-Dog shouted. It's simple, the shepherd said. The sinner will kiss a lost one. He nodded toward the caged walker. If he survives after being kissed, it proves his sins do not warrant death. If he dies or turns, it means he got what he deserved. You're out of your damn minds, T-Dog broke down. Isn't that murder? How could anyone survive being bitten? You're all lunatics. The lost ones are pure, a sub-leader beside the shepherd snapped, righteous and hard. They have no souls, no selfish desires. They are God's most impartial scales. If a person is innocent, the lost ones will naturally not harm him. This is just an excuse to torture people, Jackie cursed. If you are unwilling, the sub-leader sneered, cutting her off. You may choose death right now, if you prefer. Silence fell over the captives. Death, or choosing someone to undergo that absurd trial. Rick closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, his blue gaze was steady. He spoke first, voice rough but firm. I'll do it. No, Lori shook her head, tears streaking down her face. Rick, no, you can't. Carl needs you. Dad, Carl cried out. Shane growled, eyes bloodshot. All jealousy and distance vanished in that instant. You can't die. You still have to lead us. No, Rick said without looking at them, fixing his stare on the shepherd. This is my decision. I'll take responsibility. Stop arguing. A calm woman's voice cut through the chaos. Jackie, once with the City Planning Bureau, had a faint, relieved smile. Pick me, she said softly. I haven't wanted to live for a long time anyway. Before anyone could answer, the shepherd laughed, a brittle sound in the cavernous workshop. Oh, how touching. He looked on with a mockingly warm expression. The leader's sacrifice, the relief of the hopeless, a rare play in the apocalypse. But haven't you misunderstood something? He tilted his head. When did I ever say you have the right to choose? The candidate for judgment, he said, gesturing to the believers who surrounded them like cattle, will be selected by us, the followers of God, who will decide who most deserves to die. He pointed to a middle-aged woman who had been at the highway, angry and ready to judge. Who do you think has the most profound sins? Without hesitation, she pointed at Daryl. Him. He cursed at me. No remorse at all. I pick him too. He looks like a thug. Yes, it's him. The votes piled up. Daryl clenched his fists and did not defend himself. He only glared. The indifferent smile on Merle's face vanished. Seeing his brother singled out, something feral shattered his reason. Panic and fury overrode fear. Fuck you all. Merle thrashed against his bindings and turned on the woman who had accused Daryl. You bitch. I'm not just going to curse you. I'm going to fucking end you. First, I'm going to ruin you and your son, then chop you both up to feed the dogs. Then he screamed at the believers. And you lot. Trash. Idiots. You sons of bitches. You're nothing but brainless walkers. I could take every one of you by myself. He looked up at the shepherd, face twisted with madness and contempt. Especially you ballless charlatan. Who the hell do you think you are? A shepherd. You're not fit to lick the soles of my boots. My dead skin is worth more than you. You're a bastard. The factory fell silent, except for Merle's heavy breathing. The believers, stunned at first, probably never having seen someone so eager to seek death, froze. Then the daze hardened into rage. Judge him. Yes, him. He's the most evil one. Choose this blasphemer. In an instant, every finger switched from Daryl to Merle. The shepherd did not look displeased. He kept his composure. It seems we have chosen the one with the most profound sins. No, Daryl watched, disbelieving. No, he lunged, eyes wild, barking in desperation. You bastards! Let him go! Merle! He tore at the air like a trapped animal, bloodshot eyes full of tears and fury. Guards rushed forward and hauled Merle to his feet, dragging him to the center of the workshop. Merle didn't resist. He didn't even look back at his brother. As he passed Rick, he paused. Listen, friendly cop. Merle's voice was strangely calm, almost mocking. Rick looked up, meeting eyes that were clear of the earlier frenzy. I'm dying in your place. Merle grinned. You owe me. You, Rick started, thinking of the man he'd handcuffed to a rooftop, the thug who'd chosen to die to protect his brother. He kept it simple. I swear it. Merle nodded, a crooked grin on his face. Very well. Merle, Daryl screamed. Sobs and keening rose around them. T-Dog and Morgan closed their eyes. Even Shane turned away, unable to watch. The shepherd raised his hand. Begin the judgment. A guard opened a heavy iron cage nearby and prodded the trapped lost one with a long blade. The walker lurched forward, step by ragged step, toward Merle, hands bound behind his back in the center of the workshop. 72. Difficult choice. Meanwhile, at Herschel's farm, the debate was growing heated. Child, what did you say? Herschel stared at Lewis in disbelief. Go back to save them? Dale sounded even more worried. Lewis, I know you're worried about them, but he sighed long and hard, at a loss for how to argue with the stubborn boy. Herschel finished for him, not addressing Lewis so much as the other adults around him. Those people are terrifying. Their base is a canning factory with high walls and barbed wire. Easy to defend, impossible to attack. Herschel's face went hollow. More importantly, their core force is a group of well-trained, well-armed soldiers who obey that shepherd without question. It's impossible for outsiders to sneak in, he said, shaking his head. A frontal assault? With only a few of us and almost no guns, that would be suicide. Those hard facts quieted the angrier voices. Louis didn't back down. He stepped up to Herschel and pressed on. Do you know the exact layout of the factory? What about guard rotations and personnel assignments? Your people are in that organization. You must know something. Herschel hesitated, looking into the boy's eyes, and finally nodded. I know a little, but not much. After they join, they're required to live inside the factory and can only come out rarely. All right. Lewis pulled a pen and paper from Miranda's backpack and started sketching as Herschel spoke. Under everyone's mixed stares, he listened to intermittent details and filled in a rough map, labeling gates, watchtowers, and the likely barracks. His mind was racing. That group had to be dealt with, but how? His first, angrier thought was to storm straight in and use his levitation ability to fling rocks and crush the guards. But all he had was that one power. It wasn't omnipotent. He'd seen how quickly plans could go wrong. Earlier that day, when he thought they had dodged trouble, a rocket launcher ambushed them. He'd tried to use levitation to control how the car flipped, and if Marge hadn't been among those checking the wreckage, they might not have escaped at all. No matter how well they planned, accidents happened. Relying on a showy magic assault would only invite catastrophe. With their limited resources, stealth and precision were the smarter options. No matter how tight the factory's security, people had to come and go. There would be opportunities. His levitation power wasn't great as a battlefield spell, but it was perfect for assassination. Crushing sentries quietly, moving stones to create diversions, manipulating weapons for surgical, long-range takedowns. For this mission, he wouldn't have to rationalize spellcasting. He could use whatever was most effective. If necessary, he could even use tricks to undermine the believer's faith from within. A rough plan began to form in his head. Herschel looked at Lewis's serious face and could no longer hide his concern. You don't really want to go yourself, do you? Yes! Herschel virtually shouted. You're just a child. What can you do? Not just me, Lewis said. He glanced at Glenn, who had come to stand beside him, eyes burning. Me and him. Those people stole our supplies and took our companions, Glenn said. I can't just sit by. Herschel stared at them. Then what do you plan to do? Lewis spoke calmly. The guards at the outer gates are the shepherd's most fanatical believers. You can't bribe or persuade them. The security is aimed at adults, he continued. A child of my size might be able to find loopholes to slip in. You're being naive, Herschel barked. Marge said those people train children to trick other survivors. Their guard against kids isn't that low. Isn't that even better? Louis countered. If they recruit children, they'll accept one more. Herschel fell silent. You want to infiltrate as an undercover kid? It's not that simple. Louis knew it wasn't simple. He couldn't exactly tell them, don't worry, I have magic. But his suggestion was meant to sound plausible to the others. Glenn immediately offered, I can try instead. It doesn't have to be you. No, Louis shook his head. First, you're an adult male and don't look weak. You're not the kind they take in. Second, I need you for something else. What? Find reinforcements, Louis said. Al and the others at the nursing home. I don't know if they'll help, but we need more muscle. And the infiltration? Glenn pressed. We still need to know where Rick and the others are being held. Right then, of those who could go, Amy was injured, Andrea was asleep after giving blood, and most of the rest were old or mothers with children. They had no obvious candidates to risk. Dale, voice hoarse, offered, I'm an old man. Not much good, but maybe I could go and pretend to join them. Not you, Louis cut in. You're the one who spoke up for that woman. They'll recognize you as soon as you get close. Dale slumped back, choking on the rejection. Miranda looked thoughtful, as if an idea had just formed. I'll go, she said. You and Glenn should try to find help, she told Louis. You've already saved some of their people before. You'll be better at convincing them if you go together. As for the undercover job, she continued, voice steady, I'm the most suitable. She explained carefully. The observer, that woman, the way she gained trust was by posing as a woman traveling with a child. We can do the same. A mother who lost her husband and is searching for her child would lower their guard. But the child is the key, Louis said, pointing out the obvious. Are you going to risk your child with you? Miranda stiffened and looked at her two kids sleeping on the sofa. For a moment, inner conflict flashed across her face. Then her expression hardened with resolve. Before she could finish, a small, timid voice came from behind her. I can, Sophia said. She had woken up and hugged her doll. Her voice was small but resolute. I can go with Aunt Miranda and pretend to be her child. Sophia, Dale and Glenn froze. No, Miranda shot up. It's too dangerous. I can go alone. They might not reject a mother who's lost her child. But Sophia's eyes were wet. Mom is still with them. I want to save her. I want to help. Sophia, you're still a child, Louis began, about to offer the comfort he always did. But Louis, Sophia interrupted, looking up at him, you're a child too. That stopped him. Miranda sighed and came to him, patting his back gently. She's right about one thing, Louis. We know you can do amazing things. Her gaze was complex and soft. You saved Merle. You led away a horde of walkers. You warned us all and helped Andrea's sister like a doctor. Maybe these dangers don't feel as threatening to you as they do to us, but we can't keep asking you to take the worst jobs. She sounded almost guilty. You're a child. It's our job to protect you. 73. Choices and persistence. Louis fell silent. He was moved, but also felt the whole thing was a little ridiculous. He had to admit he'd cultivated an image that had been maybe too successful, so much so that these kind people now imagined instinctively that he would throw himself away to save everyone. In reality, his plan this time was to go in and kill them. He wasn't planning on dying. Still, Miranda's words stung. Louis was used to weighing risks and rewards like a strategist, but he'd underestimated what this omnipotence meant to others. He couldn't let the team get used to the idea of Louis descending from the sky to fix everything. If everyone took his abilities for granted, that would be the real danger. Miranda's suggestion had practical merit. A grieving mother searching for her daughter was a convincing cover, and if she could blend in, it would make Louis' shadow work that much easier. With that in mind, he quietly adjusted his plan. Herschel watched helplessly as the survivors, in a few words, sketched out a reckless rescue mission centered on a single 11-year-old child. For a moment, he wondered if he'd failed to make the dangers clear. You guys, Herschel began to protest, But seeing the fire of revenge in Glenn and Louis's eyes and Miranda's desperate resolve, he swallowed his words. Dale sighed, patted Herschel's shoulder, and shook his head. Then he turned to the group and asked, "Is there anything I can do?" A flicker of gratitude crossed Miranda's tense face. "Please help me look after the children," Louis added, "and Andrea and Amy. One just had a blood transfusion, the other's still recovering from a serious injury. Both are weak and need someone to watch over them." He looked up at the sky. It was late. "Everyone rest tonight," he decided. "We'll start the plan tomorrow, in daylight." It had to be. They'd all been through ambushes, crashes, frantic escapes, and brutal injuries. Everyone was exhausted. Even if Louis hadn't quite reached his limits, the constant mental strain and physical exertion had worn him down. He couldn't be driven straight to 9 and forced to take risky action on empty reserves. He wanted revenge and to rescue his friends as fast as possible, but it had to be on a foundation that protected his life. The situation had already stretched beyond what any plot would allow. He couldn't be sure whether Rick and the others' plot armor would hold through the night. But he certainly wouldn't risk throwing his life away now. Besides, Louis's eyes glinted in the dark. If that shepherd is yelling about judgment instead of just killing people outright, then this so-called judgment probably follows some kind of procedure. They still had time. Louis wasn't arrogant. Along the way, he'd come to know this group's resilience. His goal this time was to kill their enemies and secure 9, not to stage a ham-fisted rescue. He trusted Rick's team, tough, experienced fighters who could be ruthless when they needed to be. Their flaw wasn't strength so much as an ill-timed compassion. But facing the inhuman believers, once the thin veneer of civilization was stripped away, Louis believed that Rick and Shane's ruthlessness alone would keep them from simply folding. "I'll do everything I can to set the stage for them," he whispered, "whether they survive until we get there. That will depend on themselves." Merle narrowed his eyes as the staggering judge approached. Ironically, the walker wore a shredded nun's habit, a broken crucifix dangling from its neck. He pulled a crooked smile and spat a mouthful of bloody saliva onto the dirt. Perfect. A nun. He knew deep down that his end might well be here. Memories from before the apocalypse flashed by. His drunk father's belt, that sergeant in the army whose 5 teeth he'd knocked out. He'd always been a bastard, trash, someone who couldn't even protect his own brother. Dying in prison, dying from drugs, rotting in some gutter, dying under a walker's jaws didn't seem that different. The walker nun walked on, meeting everyone's eyes. Shouts of judgment swelled around them, turning the scene grotesquely ceremonial. For a moment, Merle almost believed it was an actual judgment. Since the fall of society, he and his brother had always been outsiders. Rick, that friendly cop, and Shane. When they looked at him, it was like they were looking at a piece of dog shit to be thrown away. If he died, no one would care except that weird, almost naive blonde kid. Why did he keep protecting that kid? Maybe the boy didn't look at him with disgust. Maybe. Merle's thoughts went darker. He'd once been the one who tried to protect Daryl, shouting, "Run!" under his father's blows. But what did that matter? He'd run away and left him. If he died now, Daryl wouldn't have to carry him anymore. Without the burden of Merle dragging him down, Daryl might be better off, live more like a person. Merle closed his eyes and accepted it. The last thing that flickered through his mind was his brother's perpetually sour face. "Damn it, Daryl, your big brother really can't protect you this time." The walker nun was only a few steps away. Its blackened fingers, nails chipped and gone, slowly rose to clamp onto Merle's shoulder. The huge mouth, half its lip rotten away, opened, gums black and yellow, ready to bite his neck. "No!" Daryl forced his eyes open, determined to etch the moment into his memory. But at the last second, Merle's eyes snapped wide. The cold press of imminent death was terrible, terrifyingly familiar. The memory of that rooftop in Atlanta, handcuffed to a pipe, surrounded by a tide of walkers, rose up like bile. He'd been as desperate then as he was now. He'd even taken a saw and prepared to saw off his own hand. If whatever god there was, or whatever cruel fate wanted him dead, why hadn't it happened then? Why had that blonde kid, Louis, appeared like a hallucination at that exact moment to save him? An ugly, furious realization burned through him. If this was all predestined, If fate had arranged it that way, why bring Lewis in to save him only for him to die now at the hands of these idiots with their brains full of dog shit? To die beneath their ridiculous judgment. Merle looked at the decaying face inches from his own, then up to 8 on the high platform, who feigned pity. You motherfuckers, do you even deserve to judge me? Fuck you! Under everyone's horrified gaze, Merle suddenly swung his leg and, with all his strength, kicked the walker hard in the stomach. The walker went flying from the force, stumbled, and fell onto its back. The cheers that had filled the factory cut off like a snapped wire. How dare he! Blasphemy! This is blasphemy! Guards instinctively raised their rifles, but the shepherd held up a hand and signaled them to stand down. He watched from the platform with a slow, hungry interest in how the trial would unfold. Merle gasped. When the walker hit the floor, he saw it, clear as day. A jagged shard of glass about 6 inches long was lodged under the tattered fabric on its back, glinting. Whether it had been driven there when the thing smashed through a window or torn in later, he couldn't tell. The sight sharpened him like a blade. He moved before anyone could react. He lunged forward, kicked the staggered walker back down, and leapt on top of it. Using his weight, he pinned it and shoved his bound hands toward the glass protruding from its back. Fuck! 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 He worked the jagged edge against the ropes, sawing like a man possessed. The old wound on his wrist rubbed across the glass. He could hear the sickening rip of flesh and the twang of rope fibers snapping free. Pain screamed through him, but he welcomed it. What is he doing? Stop him! He's cheating! No, this is part of the trial. The lost ones will punish him. Look, Merle roared, blood and sweat stinging his eyes as he forced his wrists against the sharp edge. See clearly. This is how I deal with your bullshit trial. The pinned walker twisted beneath him and suddenly flipped, slamming Merle to the concrete. It leapt up and lunged again. Too late. The ropes had finally given. Come on, you bitch. A savage light lit Merle's face. As the thing pounced, his freed hands shot up and closed around its neck. They rolled, man and undead, snarling and grappling across the floor. Every ounce of Merle's strength poured into him. He roared, reversed their positions, grabbed a handful of the thing's rotten hair, and drove its head into the concrete again and again. Thud, thud, thud. He rode the walker like a fury. Rotten flesh, shattered bone, black blood and brain matter sprayed, spattering his face and clothes. He didn't stop. He crushed the jaw, caved the eye sockets, smashed the skull until the head became nothing more than a pulpy mess, useless and silent. The factory fell into a dead, stunned hush. Only Merle's ragged breathing echoed. Faces that had leaned forward in morbid appetite froze, mouths hung open, the zeal in their eyes draining away and being replaced by something colder, fear. Merle eased up. He looked at his hands, at the motionless corpse under him, and then he smiled. He grabbed what was left of the head, barely hanging by a shred of flesh, and ripped it free with a wet sound. Under everyone's utterly terrified stare, Merle stood. He held the dripping head high like a war trophy, surveying the room. Then, with a bloody grin, he pressed the severed throat to his cheek and rubbed it, leaving a smear of viscous black blood like a kiss. Trial? He asked, mockingly. He tossed the head aside and flipped both middle fingers up at the shepherd on the platform. He laughed, deep, hoarse, unhinged. Is this your bullshit trial, huh? You trash! You sons of bitches! Who else here wants to fucking judge me? Who else? Rick stared, stunned. He hadn't expected Merle to strike back so ferociously, and he felt the small, odd rush of shock at the man's courage. Shane watched with a long, considering look. He had always mistrusted the Dixon brothers, especially Merle, seen him as a liability, a racist, a loose cannon. But now, seeing the man fight like this for his brother, Shane couldn't help but respect the raw ruthlessness that had saved them. The others wore messier, mixed expressions. T-Dog's face folded with conflict. He had thought Merle nothing but a cowardly bully, but the man who had snatched life from a walker's jaws for his kin complicated that judgment. Darrell sank to his knees and looked up at the figure standing like a demon amid the blood. He smiled, and the smile broke into a flood of tears that ran down his grimy cheeks. I knew you, bastard. Wouldn't die that easy, he choked. The believers recovered, and with recovery came panic and outrage. How could this happen? He passed the test, but he's clearly a sinner. No, this must be cheating. He killed a lost one. His sin is compounded. Merle hadn't just saved himself. His violent defiance had bought the others a sliver of time. Amid the chaos, Rick lifted his head. He found the shepherd's eyes on him from the platform, and steadying himself, Rick spoke loud and clear. "We are innocent." The arguing halted as if struck. Rick's next words tore through the hush like thunder. "We are innocent!" The shout sparked something in the crowd. It spread, igniting others. Faces that had been uncertain found voice. The believers' certainty began to crack. Jim, who had been kneeling like a broken man, suddenly lifted his head. His eyes were vacant and clear at once, seeming to see through every fate in the room. A grin crawled across his face, thin and drifting, and his voice slid out slow and strange. "You were born of God's mercy." He let his voice climb, touched with a kind of mad triumph, "and you shall die by God's wrath." 75. As God said. Jim's deranged prophecy echoed through the suddenly silent workshop like an icy curse. The believers' commotion faltered. They stared in terror at the suddenly mad man, then shifted uneasy glances up at the high platform. Merle's violence had overturned their ritual. Rick's declaration had shaken their notion of justice. Jim's words struck directly at their faith. The guards tightened their grips on their guns, unsure whether to subdue the madman first or wait for the shepherd's command. Under the searchlights, the shepherd on the platform finally moved. Faced with the collapse of his trial and Merle's bloody provocation, his face showed no anger, only a look of near pity. He raised a hand. A single gesture brought the agitated guards to a halt. Then he descended from the platform and stopped at a threateningly safe distance from Merle. He began to clap softly. The crisp sound was eerily out of place in the vast factory. The shepherd showed no panic. His calm, magnetic voice carried to every corner. "Look, my children." The believers looked up, confused, toward their lone leader. "Are you puzzled? Are you wavering?" His voice soothed. "Are you wondering why a deeply sinful person, a blasphemer, passed the lost one's trial?" He raised a finger and pointed at the remains of the Walker nun on the ground, more precisely, at the blood-stained shard of glass. "Because this is precisely God's test, a test for all of us." His voice grew louder, full of fanatical charisma. "God intentionally left a loophole, a sliver of hope almost impossible for mortals to find. He is testing us," he went on, scanning his flock. "He is watching to see whether we are mere executioners who blindly follow cold rituals, or whether we can perceive the mercy behind his actions." He pointed at Merle. "This sinner seized the 1 in 10,000 chance God granted him. With his own blood and will, he moved the lost ones." The shepherd spread his arms, rapturous. Even someone burdened with such sin, God is willing to give a chance at redemption. This is God's supreme mercy. His words were sophistry that worked like a powerful sedative, instantly smoothing over the believer's doubts and fears. Confusion turned within seconds into a more turbulent, fanatical faith. A miracle, a miracle. God is merciful. The shepherd saw through everything. He understands God's will. Cheers and prayers filled the factory again, more terrifying than the earlier uproar during the trial. Rick's heart sank. The shepherd was an extremely dangerous madman. However he did it, there was no doubt that his words carried incomparable weight among these people, not something a few sentences could undo. The shepherd watched the response with satisfaction and raised a hand to quiet them. "Take the sinners away." His voice returned to calm. "Though God is merciful, the trial will continue. They must labor to cleanse their sins." "Yes!" The guards, as if granted amnesty, surged forward. Still shaken by Merle's outburst, they were even more brutal this time, roughly hauling people up from the ground. "No! Don't touch him!" someone shouted as a guard reached for Carl in Laurie's arms. Rick twisted, slammed his shoulder into the man, and sent him stumbling. Another guard answered with a punch and a kick that sent Rick to the floor. "Dad!" Carl screamed. Shane tried to intervene, but other guards pinned him down. A cold female voice halted them. Marge strode over, frowning and casting menacing looks at the guards. The shepherd only said to take them away, not to cripple them. The guards exchanged glances, then reluctantly sheathed their weapons. Marge looked down at the fallen Rick, her voice without warmth. "Don't resist. Come with me." Rick gritted his teeth as guards hauled him up, while Shane and Daryl shouted in fury. The group was torn apart. "No, you can't do this." Lori watched in despair as Rick was dragged toward a dark, damp room. Rick, Shane, Daryl, and others were shoved into a stinking dungeon converted from a large storage cage. "Get in, hero," a guard mocked as he shoved Merle into a smaller, filthier, solitary cage next door. Special treatment for his earlier defiance. The guards locked the doors and their footsteps faded away. "Wait," Rick called in a low voice as Marge turned to leave, pressing against the iron bars. Her steps halted in the shadows. "Why are you helping us?" he asked, staring at her back. Marge did not turn. Her voice was as cold as the air. "I'm not helping you. I'm helping myself." She walked away without looking back. In the dark passage, she clenched her fist hard enough to bite the skin, thinking of her father, Herschel's humiliated face when he was forced to hand over supplies, and of the shepherd's hand on her cheek during the blessing, the touch that had left a lingering, nauseating demand. Time was running out. If she wanted to deal with these damned believers, relying on herself and her clueless brother wouldn't be enough. Perhaps she glanced back at the locked iron door. Perhaps this group of tough people who had taken down Martin and dared to defy the trial publicly were the help she'd been waiting for. The morning mist had not yet cleared when a stolen car eased to a stop at a street corner on the outskirts of the nursing home. Lewis killed the engine. Glenn used abandoned vehicles as cover as they moved toward the familiar building. "Something's wrong," Glenn whispered. The nursing home's main gate was shut tight, but intense arguing came from inside. They exchanged a look and decided to skip the front entrance. Glenn led Lewis to a breach in the fence on the side, a path they'd noticed during their last escape. The two slipped in silently and pressed themselves into the building's shadow. In the courtyard, the atmosphere was tense. Al and his group were being held down by a small, fully armed squad, 5 or 6 men, well-equipped, led by an enforcer with fierce, gleaming eyes. At that moment, the man had the barrel of his pistol pressed against Al's forehead, forcing him to bow his head. "Al," the enforcer snapped, impatient. "The shepherd's patience is limited. I'll ask one last time. Where is the offering?" Al's fists were clenched so tight his veins stood out, but looking at his brother being held at gunpoint, he swallowed his anger. "We really don't have any more food. You just took a batch last week. That was your tribute to the deity." The pistol-wielding believer sneered as he cocked his gun. "You seem to have forgotten the doctrine. Hand it over now, or you and these old men will all be judged together." In the shadows, Glenn's face went ashen. "Damn it, it's them," he hissed under his breath. How could they be here? Then he remembered Martin's notes, and a realization clicked into place. Right, they've had their eyes on this place for a while. Louis narrowed his eyes. If we'd known they'd make a delivery to our doorstep today, we wouldn't have needed Aunt Miranda to take that risk. Delivery to our doorstep? Glenn blinked, then understood. That's one way to put it. His head cocked, excitement flashing in his eyes. So our commander already came up with a plan? Louis quickly surveyed the scene. The attackers were spread out, 2 guarding the truck, while the rest pinned Al and his men in the courtyard. Their attention's all on Al, Louis whispered. You provide cover here. I'll circle from those bushes over there and try to take out the 2 sentries by the truck first. After that, he sketched the rest of the assault in broad strokes. Once it's over, we should leave a few alive to interrogate. Glenn's voice went dry. He instinctively lowered it, as if double-checking he'd heard right. Louis, what do you mean by leave a few alive? He stared at Louis, hoping for something softer. Knock them out or disarm them. Louis read the conflict on his face. He knew Glenn, Rick, and the others still had trouble crossing that line. But they didn't have time for a moral debate. The enemy wouldn't wait. Even if it bruised his reputation a bit, he had to push them to act. He pretended not to notice and added calmly, if we really can't take any alive, wiping them all out is fine too. Glenn's breath hitched. He opened his mouth, then closed it, torn. Louis watched him knowingly. What's wrong? No. Glenn didn't reply at once. He breathed in, rubbed his face hard, then turned his back to the cold wall as if steeling himself. A few seconds later, the boyish, carefree look was gone. The plan is good. He didn't say more, but he had one practical objection. If we go too far, they'll just drive off in that truck. He pointed to the vehicle parked by the gate. Once they get in, we lose all initiative. We won't capture anyone alive. We might even let them escape. Glenn focused on the problem. See that truck? The 2 sentries are watching the courtyard, not the back. I can circle from that wall over there and sneak up behind the truck. His eyes sharpened. Maybe I can sabotage it, puncture the tires, cut off their retreat, and they'll be trapped like sitting ducks. Lewis considered it. It was the safer, more reliable option. What do you need me to do? Create a distraction, Glenn said. Draw their attention while I make my move. No problem. Leave it to me. They split up. Glenn ghosted around the far side of the building, while Lewis slipped into a blind spot opposite him. He hid behind a row of abandoned wheelchairs and looked up at a half-opened second-floor window of the nursing home, where a line of long-dried flower pots sat on the sill. He raised his hand and took aim at the largest pot. Silent magic gathered at his fingertips. In the courtyard, the pistol-wielding believer was still berating Al. Then, crash! A large flower pot fell from above and smashed on the courtyard floor less than 2 meters from the believer. What was that? All the believers startled, guns snapping up toward the second floor. Shit! Someone check! See if a walker got in! The pistol-wielding believer roared, shaken. As he shouted, the second flower pot on the sill gave a creaking warning, as if about to fall. Everyone's attention snapped to that eerie noise. No one noticed that the instant the first pot hit, Glenn ghosted up to the back of the truck. The 2 sentries were nervously watching the building, their backs to him. Without hesitation, Glenn slid under the truck, drew a knife, and stabbed the thick sidewalls of the 2 rear tires. Hissed of air escaping hissed out, perfectly masked by the creaking pot and the believer's curses. Glenn didn't leave right away. After confirming the tires were deflating fast, he crept to the passenger side. The door was unlocked. He yanked it open and scanned inside. 2 rifles and a bag of ammunition lay on the seat. His heart pounding, he grabbed the weapons, slung them over his shoulder, then melted back into cover and signaled mission accomplished toward Lewis. Lewis saw the signal, and the timing was right. He glanced at the courtyard. The believer sent to check the second floor was almost down, and Al and the others were starting to stir as the attackers were distracted. Lewis moved, accidentally making a small noise behind the wheelchairs. Who's there? One of the believers snapped his gun to the wheelchairs. Shit! Where'd this brat come from? The pistol-wielding believer turned, eyes hard, staring toward Lewis' hiding spot. Don't shoot! Lewis feigned panic, raising his hands and pretending to step out. I didn't mean to, I was just passing by. Passing by my ass, the pistol-wielding believer barked. He wasn't about to let a child off and lifted his muzzle, as if to teach the kid a lesson. Crash! Another flower pot fell from the second floor, but this time it didn't miss. It landed square on the pistol-wielding believer's head. He didn't even grunt. His body went limp, and he crumpled. Boss? Huh? The remaining 2 believers froze, staring in disbelief at their fallen comrade, and then up at the second floor. In that split second of confusion, swish! Swish! 2 flashes of cold light sliced through the air from Lewis's direction. The prepped throwing knives struck like vipers, driving through the eyes of the 2 men into their brains. Both dropped dead where they stood. Al and his men were stunned. He had been trying desperately to figure out how to protect his people without provoking the attackers. The blonde kid who'd saved their companion at the nursing home and helped treat the wounded had seemed hopeless moments ago. Now the kid, who Al had thought was done for, appeared to have fallen back from danger, only to throw knives that killed 2 armed men with impossible speed. The scene left Al and his men momentarily frozen. What's happening? The few attackers left in the courtyard and the one who had just come out of the building shouted and brought their guns up. Move! Al snapped out of his shock and led his men to pounce on the nearest believer. Gunfire erupted. The remaining believers, seeing their pistol-wielding leader dead and suddenly outmatched, panicked and tried to fall back to the truck, only to find the weapons inside were already gone. 77. Magic and ruthlessness. The guns! Where are the guns? Forget it. Let's go. Drive. Several men rushed into the truck in a panic and tried to start it. They slammed the pedal, but the engine only gave a weak cough. The chassis sagged, and the truck refused to move. Damn it! The tires are flat! Hey guys! Glenn's voice cut through from behind the truck like a death knell. Where do you think you're going? He leaned out, rifle raised, and fired without hesitation. Bang! Bang, bang. A few shots found thighs. The men went down screaming. Al's brothers surged forward and pinned the remaining knights. The fight was over. Louis? Al and the others approached Louis and watched, astonished, as he calmly organized the captured weapons. You can do that too? A young boy blurted. It was Miguel, the unfortunate 9 who'd been bullied by the Dixon brothers and who had led Rick and the others to Al in the first place. That was freaking cool. Miguel gushed, eyes shining. Louis learned that back at Harrison Hospital. Amazing, right? Glenn said as he strolled over, looking uncharacteristically proud. Miguel stared at him speechless. Then why are you so proud? I thought he learned it from you. Glenn pointed at the weapon bag he'd grabbed and the disabled truck. But your skill at stealing guns and popping tires was pretty fantastic too. The smile on Glenn's face collapsed at that. If you really can't think of a good compliment, you don't have to force one. The survivors exchanged looks and burst out laughing. The levity faded quickly, and the mood turned grim as both sides swapped information. Louis confirmed what they'd feared. These believers had long since set their sights on the nursing home. Al and his group finally understood just how twisted their enemies were. Al admitted they'd once been blinded by 8's seeming charity, taking in the vulnerable, until 8 demanded they use the nursing home's elderly as bait. They wanted us to use the grandpas and grandmas as bait to lure other survivors. Philip's whole body trembled with rage as he spoke. Al punched the wall in fury. When we refused that bastard shepherd called us traitors and forced us to pay tributes. They'd been enduring extortion and threats for too long. Now Louis and Glenn had brought word that Rick's team had been captured and had just helped them take care of an enemy squad. Combining old grudges and fresh outrage, Al and his brothers agreed. They were ready to act. They began checking ammunition, preparing to move out. Wait a moment. Louis stopped Al just as he reached for the ammo. He walked to the bound 9s, who glared at them with hatred, a cold glint in his eyes. Before we rush over there, he said, pointing at 8, there's something we need to know. The pause steadied the group. Al glanced from the prisoners to his own ragtag team. The tension in his shoulders eased. Charging off now would be suicide. His anger settled into a hard, focused resolve. You're right, we were too impulsive. Drag them into the storage room. We need to pry their mouths open before we go. Louis had expected the sequence of events, accidentally killing the leader with a flower pot and immediately taking out 2 others, might raise suspicion from Al and the others. He had a rough explanation ready. But on the battlefield, people didn't notice the finer details. The impact of close calls had already filled in the blanks for them. Since no one asked, Louis didn't offer an explanation. He watched as Al's men hauled the prisoners toward the storage room they'd set up as an interrogation space and followed. Inside the storage room, the light was dim. Al's men dragged in the believer who'd been shot in the thigh. Talk! Where's your base? How many of you are there? Al picked up a pair of rusty pliers from a toolbox and snapped them open and shut for effect. Wait! Louis's voice came from the doorway. Al turned to see Louis enter, carrying a medical kit. I have a faster way. Glenn's expression went complicated. He leaned forward and muttered, You're not telling me you learned this at Harrison Hospital too. It's the CDC, Louis corrected evenly. He ignored the puzzled stares and took syringes and several small bottles from the kit. Dr. Jenna gave these to me when I left the CDC. He spoke with a straight face. It's a potent sedative, but its side effects are specific. It can produce intense hallucinations, making it difficult to tell reality from delusion. He looked at the prisoner tied to the chair. With this, combined with some suggestion and technique, he'll tell us everything. But, Louis added, his voice tightening, I have to do this alone. Too many people around will interfere with his mental state and ruin the drug's effect. Al, Glenn, he said, meeting both their eyes, can you stand watch outside? The next steps are critical. No matter what happens, do not disturb me. Al and Glenn exchanged a look, part skepticism, part hesitation. Let A-10 perform an interrogation? Still, memories of Louis saving people, warning them, killing enemies, flashed unbidden. This 10 always seemed to have a reason. His odd choices often worked out. Lewis caught that softening in them and didn't give them time to argue. He closed and locked the door behind him. The heavy thunk of the lock echoed in the hall as Al and Glenn stood guard. Both men felt uneasy. Hearing Louis recite those scientific reasons and seeing the pressure in his gaze, they had almost obeyed on reflex, but now, outside the closed door, the responsibility felt heavy. This, Al scratched his head, feeling absurd. We're really just going to leave him in there, alone, to do that? Glenn had no ready answer. At that moment, Philip arrived, frowning. He glanced at the locked door, then at Glenn, his face full of disapproval. Glenn, Philip lowered his voice. I know it's the apocalypse, and Rick's a hell of a guy, but I don't want to criticize someone's choices. Is Rick being that irresponsible with him? What on earth has he been teaching Lewis? Philip frowned. How old is Lewis? 10? 11? How on earth are you putting him in charge of this? I just saw him strike at those men without even blinking, Al said, his face darkening. Honestly, I'm grateful. He saved us all. But that doesn't make it right. Philip paced, anxiety tightening his voice. Nobody likes torturing others. Louis is such a kind 10. He'd have to hate doing this even more than we do. He spent the earlier part helping the others. Al's voice carried a guilt that made his words heavier. Now he's stuck doing this dirty work alone. Even if it's to save Rick and the others, he shouldn't have to be the one to do it. You're both right. Glenn's expression turned grave. Al and Philip's arguments made sense. Lewis was shouldering a darkness none of them should have had to bear. Maybe I should be the one to interrogate him, Glenn said, taking it seriously. It might take longer, but we can't let. He moved to open the door and found it firmly locked from the inside. The group exchanged looks of helplessness and self-reproach. Inside the room, Louis had no idea what the others outside were imagining. He was alone with the seven bound to a chair, and the man's hostile stare met a smile on Louis's face that must have looked sinister. Louis didn't speak at first. He walked to the medical kit, took out a small bundle wrapped in cloth, and slammed it onto the table with a thud in front of the seven. Slowly he untied the cord and unfolded the cloth. Under the light, the contents gleamed coldly, not bandages, but a row of metal tools, several scalpels of different sizes, a pair of hemostatic forceps, a long probe, and even a small hand-cranked bone drill. Bah, you brat, you think that scares me? The man spat. His contempt was unbroken, as if he were looking at a child playing at something he didn't understand. Louis ignored the sneer and calmly drew a syringe, sucking in a clear liquid. Do you know what this is? He asked in a patient voice. It's a potion that will make you relax. He met the man's hostile gaze with an almost gentle tone. If you cooperate, it will be over in a few minutes. You won't feel anything unpleasant, I promise. He paused and added, more quietly, but if you don't cooperate, it's just to make sure that when you relax, you won't move and ruin my aim with the knife. The man kept his proud, death before dishonor expression. So you won't cooperate, Louis said with regret, shaking the syringe in his hand. I hope your secrets aren't hidden too deep. For example, he continued, stepping closer despite the man's struggles, hidden inside your bones. He plunged the needle into the man's arm. Now, let's begin. Louis discarded the syringe, took 2 steps back, and under the other's suspicious, uncertain glare, pulled out his 6. Meanwhile, inside the 8, the air was cold and damp, thick with the sour smell of fear and sweat. Lori, Jenny, Carol, and the others had been shoved together in a corner behind wire mesh, clutching their children and trying to shield them from the leers of the guards. Heavy boots echoed as they approached. A scarred man entered, followed by several guards wearing predatory smiles. The shepherd is merciful, the scarred man rasped as he stopped at the fence, his gaze sliding over the women like a snake. You're not like those men whose sins are beyond redemption. You have a chance to atone by using your bodies to serve the Tharo. Lori went pale, her stomach rolling. You animals! Jacques sprang to her feet, grabbed the fence, and shouted, Stop! The scarred man slammed the butt of his gun against the fence without a second's hesitation. The impact sent Jacques stumbling back with a cry. Shut up, bitch! He snarled, yanking the latch and pushing through with his gun raised. It seems you all want to receive the 6 that we gave those men. Fine, his barrel swept over the faces of several trembling children. Then we'll start with your children. No, Lori screamed, throwing her arms around Carl to protect him. Carl, fighting his own fear, shoved his mother's hand away and stepped out from behind her. Every eye turned to the young boy. You need manpower, right? Carl's body trembled, but he forced himself to meet the scarred man's eyes. I can join you, just like that woman, 10 on the highway. The scarred man paused, lowering his gun as he looked Carl over with interest. Ha, interesting, he called toward the door. Rat, come see your new recruit. A broad-shouldered black teenager, about 14 or 15, strode in, wearing an oversized military coat and an arrogant smirk. He was clearly the leader of the kids. Rat looked Carl up and down with disdain. Him? He's too small. Looks like a girl. Leaning close, Rat dropped his voice into a leering whisper. But small's good. Once you're washed, some of the adults like your type. Carl froze, but he ignored Rat and focused on the scarred man. He's right about one thing, Carl said, voice shaking but steady enough. I am very young. Rat's smug grin faltered at the admission. Carl's mind raced. Being young means you're harmless. People let their guard down around you. He watched the scarred man's face and saw a flicker of dismissal when he mentioned lowered defenses. Pushing further, Carl adjusted his pitch. What I mean is, he said, meeting the man's scrutiny head-on, only this way can you better test the good and evil of those survivors. The scarred man's expression shifted. Carl realized he'd hit the right chord and pressed on. If a camp rejects or harms a 10 like me, aren't those exactly the people you need to judge? Ha, talk back, do you? Rat, humiliated, shoved Carl in anger. What's the point of a smooth talker? Look how he's shaking. He'll just slow us down. Carl staggered but steadied himself, still staring at the man in charge. Of course I'm shaking. I know your gun's real. Only a fool wouldn't be afraid. A true coward, he added, voice growing firmer, would be begging for mercy right now, not standing here trying to make a deal. The scarred man laughed, entertained by Carl's nerve. He waved off Rat, then pulled a heavy handgun from his belt and dropped it at Carl's feet. Good lad. I like your guts. Suddenly, he kicked the back of Carl's knee. Carl gasped and dropped to his knees. Pick it up, the man commanded. Lori screamed and begged, but the scarred man ignored her. He roughly grabbed Carl and dragged him toward the door. Prove your value, he sneered. Follow me. Prison area. Rick, Shane, and the others leaned against the cold iron bars, arguing about a possible escape. Clang. The harsh clang of an iron door echoed down the corridor. The Scarface man appeared, escorting Carl. Dad! Carl couldn't contain himself when he saw Rick and shouted, Carl? Rick's eyes went wide with rage. He lunged at the bars, fingers reaching uselessly between the gaps. What are you going to do to him? Let him go. Don't you dare touch her. Shane slammed against the door like a man possessed, bloodshot eyes fixed on the Scarface man. Come at me if you've got the guts. Come at me. Don't you dare touch my family. Quiet, the Scarface man snapped, firing a shot into the ceiling. He shoved the pistol into Carl's trembling hand and pushed him forward so he faced Rick through the iron. Kill him, the Scarface man said flatly. Prove your loyalty. Silence fell over the whole cell block. Rick stopped pounding on the bars and panted, chest heaving. Sweat, blood, and grime clung to his hair and dripped down his jaw. He kept his head down for a moment, then slowly lifted it, his bloodshot blue eyes fixed on the Scarface man. Shoot, you little coward, the Scarface man barked, producing another pistol and jabbing it hard against the back of Carl's head. Rick's fingers dug into the cold iron until the bars bit his palms. His knuckles went white. You're going to die, he said through clenched teeth, each word deliberate. I promise, I will kill you with my own hands. The Scarface man's expression darkened. Ha! He scoffed. That depends on whether you get the chance. Shoot! Now! Carl was shaking. The gun in his hand felt impossibly heavy. He looked at the battered man in the cage who still held his head high, his father. After a long, silent moment, Carl's hand slowly lowered the weapon. No. What did you say? The Scarface man thought he had misheard. I said, no. Carl turned and glared at him with eyes rimmed red. If I kill him today, his voice trembled but was clear, then I'm useless. He pointed at Rick. You're using me because they're still alive, aren't you? Because you think you can use them to threaten and control me. If I were someone who could kill my own father, would you still try to use my mother? Use my family to make me do what you want? You wouldn't trust me." The Scarface man stared for a beat. The onlookers who'd come to watch the spectacle looked at Carl in surprise. Then the Scarface man burst into loud laughter, clapping slowly. "Good! Good boy! Well said! You passed!" He snatched the gun from Carl and roughly hauled him toward the cell. "Carl!" Rick's roar followed them, but the door slammed shut before it reached them. Inside the cell, Lori and the others huddled together, despair written on their faces. The Scarface man's smile turned cruel. "You're smart, kid," he told Carl. "You've proven your value, but a tool is only valuable when it's useful." He leveled the gun at another boy, Dwayne, who was pressed against his mother, Jenny. "I can give you a chance to stay," the Scarface man said, smiling with malice. "Now it's your turn to clean up the useless things. Kill him." Carl's pupils shrank. "What?" He stared at the Scarface man, realizing the man meant it this time. He wanted Carl to kill Dwayne. He argued instinctively, "Why? He can work. He can be like me." The Scarface man treated the idea like a joke. He looked over at Rat with obvious interest. "Not everyone qualifies to join us," he sneered. He tapped Rat with the barrel, then pointed the gun at Dwayne. "We already have one black rat." The guards burst into crude laughter. Rat's face flushed. He felt the blatant contempt and mockery from his companions. He clenched his fists, but couldn't lash out at the Scarface man. The Scarface man ignored him and dismissed Dwayne with a sneer. "And this one," he said, "is not as clever as Rat, nor can he fight as well." "For a black rat like this, one is enough," the Scarface man said, patting Rat's head. "He's a defective product. We don't need him." "No," Jenny screamed, wrenching herself forward before guards forced her back. Rat dumped all his humiliation and anger onto the weakest target. With a vicious bang, he dragged Dwayne out and kicked him in the stomach. "Useless! A useless brat who only knows how to cry." Rat beat Dwayne until the boy curled up on the ground, unable to make a sound. Then he stopped and glared at Carl with brutal eyes. "Aren't you going to do it? What the hell are you standing there for?" Carl held the gun, his heart torn. He hesitated, then looked at the Scarface man's smiling face. A mad thought flickered through his mind. Kill him, shoot him dead. But he immediately saw the other guards, the indifferent children at the door, and realized the odds. He didn't even know how to use a gun properly. Even if he got lucky and hit the Scarface man, the others would cut them down in seconds. It was a trap. He couldn't kill the enemy, and he couldn't protect his friend. Carl's eyes dimmed with despair, and that despair washed over Dwayne like a tide. Dwayne lay on the ground in searing pain, fear burying him like cold mud. He stared at the dark muzzle of the gun in Carl's hand and felt like he was about to die. He heard his mother's sobs and saw the mixture of tears and sorrow on Carl's face. He felt useless, only able to take hits, to tremble, to make his mother cry, and to wait, helpless, for his friend to be forced to kill him. If it were Louis, the image of that kid flashed through Dwayne's mind. If Louis were here, he'd find a way. He was smart, he was capable, he wouldn't lie on the ground like trash waiting for death. 80. I am the only one would. In his despair, an image suddenly pierced his mind, something that had happened not long ago at Harrison Hospital. He remembered Louis in the corner of the ward, practicing with the 9 over and over, his eyes frighteningly focused. Back then, Dwayne had been puzzled and asked Louis why he wasn't afraid when killing walkers, and why he forced himself to learn that boring first aid stuff every day when he already knew so much. Louis hadn't explained in detail, only answering with a complicated look. "Because for kids like us, surviving is hard, Dwayne. Sometimes walkers aren't our only enemies. Living people are too. We have adults to protect us, but they can't be there forever. The only person you can truly rely on is yourself." At the time, Dwayne hadn't grasped the full meaning. Now, looking at the sneering Scarface man, at the rat who was kicking and punching him, and at Carl, who was also a last 11 but forced to hold a gun, he understood a little. Carl had used his wits to withstand Scarface man's pressure and might even have saved the adults. He had done everything he could. Now it was someone else's turn. "All right, stop dawdling. You little piece of trash, can you do it or not?" Scarface man barked at Carl. "You." Dwayne curled on the ground, making indistinct sounds. "Huh? You damn well dare to curse?" Rat took Dwayne's noises for provocation. He crouched and grabbed Dwayne by the collar, ready to haul him up for another beating. As Rat leaned in, Dwayne suddenly moved. His hand, which had been buried in his pocket, whipped out like lightning. With all his strength, he plunged the weapon into Rat's neck. Blood sprayed. Everyone watched in disbelief. Even Scarface Man froze for a moment. Rat clutched his throat, a section of metal lodged there, with a cord still attached to the end. He made a few gurgling sounds, eyes wide, and collapsed. Only then did people see clearly what was embedded in Rat's neck. A uniquely shaped, the same one Louis had lent Dwayne when they left the CDC. Dwayne pulled the 9 free. Hot blood spattered his face. He stared at the stunned Scarface Man, breathing hard, and said, his voice trembling but steady, "Now there's only one of you left too." Silence swallowed the relocation area. Time seemed to stop. The other children who had been recruited by the believers finally reacted, screaming and rushing forward, but when they touched the blood-spraying hole in Rat's neck, they recoiled in terror. He's dead. Rat is dead. Scarface Man remained unmoved for a moment, his smile frozen as he looked from the corpse to Dwayne. A few seconds later, he frowned, annoyed by the commotion. "Enough," he said with a strange calm, waving off several guards who were about to step forward. "Don't make a fuss." He holstered his gun and walked slowly toward Dwayne, sizing him up like an interesting tool. "Well," he said, a hint of approval in his voice, "you're a bit more capable than I expected. Maybe I could keep you around, make you a new rat." Relief swept through Carl, Dwayne, and the others. The smile vanished from Scarface Man's face, replaced by a sneer. "Unfortunately," he said with a cruel laugh, "I fucking hate black 16s. Then he kicked Dwayne hard in the chest. "So you go die too?" "No." Jenny's sanity snapped. She lunged at the fence, shaking and pounding the iron bars, begging incoherently, kill me instead. He knows nothing. Please." Scarface Man ignored her, about to raise his knife, when an elderly woman stepped forward and pressed her withered hand against his arm. "Wait!" Jenny's cries choked off. Her bloodshot eyes found the woman. Tears still fell, but she held her breath. She didn't dare hope, only watched, waiting to see if there was any humanity left in them. The woman reached into her apron and pulled out a rusty kitchen knife. For a blasphemer, it's better to use this. That flicker of hope died in Jenny. She stopped shaking and straightened her bent back. Searing hatred rose in her chest, burning away sorrow. She stared at the woman, who handed over the knife with red-rimmed eyes, as though she wanted to carve her into memory. Then her gaze slid past the knife and fixed on the sneering faces around them. Scarface Man took the knife with a curled lip and aimed it at Dwayne's neck. "Stop!" Marge arrived just in time. Scarface Man paused and turned. When he saw her, the malice on his face didn't fade so much as turn irritated. I wondered who it was, Miss Marge. He didn't lower the knife. Instead, he prodded Dwayne's cheek with the blade and taunted, "Can't you see? I'm judging a brat who killed one of our brothers. This isn't your business." Marge's eyes went colder. "I will report Rat's death to the shepherd personally," she said. "Judgment belongs to the shepherd, not to you." The twitch in Scarface Man's face showed how much the title weighed on him. He let out a laugh that crawled under the skin, then slowly sheathed the knife. "Fine," he spat. "You're right. A major matter like this ought to be decided by Lord Shepherd himself." He motioned for his men to pull the children away from Dwayne and glared at the huddled women. "No need to trouble you. I can go report it right now." Walking up to Marge, he stopped to leer her up and down, lowering his voice and smearing his words with slither. "However, Miss Marge," he said, emphasizing the next word like a threat, "you'd better pray Lord Shepherd's patience with you remains this good." Marge said nothing. She watched coldly as Scarface Man and his men swaggered out of the relocation area. "The shepherd's patience?" she thought with quiet fury. "You'd better pray that before my patience runs out, I don't blow your head off first.